All right, Psalm 51, let's call this one Cleanse Me, as the who is going to come in the form of David, asking God for mercy and cleansing from his sin with Bathsheba. The what is going to come in the form of what God is going to do in response to David's prayer, which is to answer it, not just answer it, but to grant his request for cleansing. And the how is going to come in the form of how David responds to God giving him another chance that does not involve him losing his life. But it's going to be a twofold how, because it's not just going to be how David responds, it's going to be him counseling us as to how we can respond with sacrifices that God actually wants in a time when he likewise gives us another chance. Beginning in verse 1, though, as we mentioned, David is going to start out with a prayer. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy. Blot out my transgression. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. Thus the title, Cleanse Me, as he is going to go on to talk about his sins and transgressions on through about verse 6, where he is going to say that God actually delights in truth in the inward being. First indication of what God is actually interested in, before David picks up that theme of cleanse me again in verse 7, where he says, purge me with hyssop and I shall be clean. Wash me and I shall be whiter than snow. A theme he's going to pick up in a very famous verse, verse 10, where he says, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me, as he goes on for another couple of verses to pray for restoration and cleansing before he shifts into a discussion of how he will respond in verse 13, where he says, then I will teach transgressors your ways and sinners will return to you. Probably the first good opportunity for a pause, or at least another good opportunity for a pause, where he talks about his response to receiving God's mercy being making sure that other people, as much as it depends upon him, can find that mercy too. But as we mentioned, it's not just a conversation about David's response. He's going to go on to say, make sure that when we show gratitude, insofar as we've gotten to a point where we understand the difference between, as we've seen before, simply saying thanks and genuinely showing gratitude, make sure that we are offering God things that he's actually interested in, as he will go on in verses 16 to the end of the chapter, describing the kind of sacrifices that God is and is not interested in. Verse 16 reading, for you will not delight in sacrifice, or I would give it. You will not be pleased with a burnt offering. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. Oh God, you will not despise. Understanding that David is not saying that God established this sacrificial system simply to say, I don't really want that. No, there was really, as we already mentioned, no sacrifice under that system that would atone for what David has done. And so understanding the depth of mercy and a second chance that God has given him, he says, look, I'm in a position where I can speak for everybody who understands. Sometimes you can't fix it. The question becomes, how can I move forward, understanding that God has given me this opportunity, a thing that we've seen before, and once again that we see here again, David seeming to recognize that it's not just enough to be a better me or a better David. He needs to be cleansed of everything that would tempt him to take a man's wife and have him killed to cover up the offense. Once again, he seemed to be an interesting contrast to the young man we mentioned from the last chapter, the young man we mentioned in the last chapter, who said, as a Christian, he didn't want to be a better human being. He just wanted to be a better sociopath. That young man giving us an extreme example of compromises we can all be tempted to make, insofar as we believe that God is simply calling me to be a better me, causing us to engage in a form of denial that blinds us to the degree to which God is actually calling us to transform, as Paul will say in Romans 12, as opposed to the desire that we might have to just kind of make some tweaks or changes. Understanding that even though David seems to provide a contrast to the young man who wants to just be a better sociopath, or us, when we just want to be a better fill in the blank, David may be engaging in some of that denial as well, understanding that Psalm 51 contains another famous passage in which David says, against you and you only have I sinned. A passage that seems to confuse just about everybody I've heard give an opinion on what it might mean, but on its face might simply be David engaging in a form of denial, which helps to actually highlight some of his wisdom, as over and over again in this chapter, he is asking God to cleanse him of everything that might lead him back down that road, even the denial to which he might still be clinging in this very chapter. And so my prayer for you is my prayer for me, that to the degree we found ourselves caught up in things that honestly make it difficult to even acknowledge the full scope of either what we've done or the damage that we've caused, may God move us beyond places of denial into places of true forgiveness. Understanding that David, even in this psalm, wasn't done, because even after he confessed his sin, God took him through some things that were possibly painful enough for him to eventually acknowledge that he hadn't just sinned against God, but he sinned against Bathsheba, Uriah, and a lot of other folks as well.